If you are a firm that is using the Locus platform for your case management system, stay put because you do not want to miss this. The entire standard operating procedure that we're putting into practice today will be on the Locus platform. Hello, and welcome back to Cass Loves Tech. In today's video, we're going to be spending some time talking about and also creating standard operating procedures for efficient client communication within your law firm CRM. And honestly, before we could even begin talking about your standard operating procedure within your CRM, we need to first think about clearly mapping out what those standard operating procedures are. And today's video is actually going to walk us through that concept. In addition to walking us through the concept, I will actually show you a standard operating procedure that I've put together based on the points that we will discuss, and then we'll go into implementing it within a CRM. So, without further delay, let's go ahead and jump right into it. All right, guys, so to begin talking about the standard operating procedure and to get you thinking about creating a standard operating procedure for effective client communication, we're going to be spending some time talking about 10 concepts. And those concepts are really essential and crucial to even create the standard operating procedure. And I want to make sure that we spend time talking about each one of those components, because when we look at the SOP that we're building today, you'll kind of see where some of those areas come into play. All right, the 10 concepts. Number 1, define objective. 2, identifying stakeholders. 3, understanding CRM features. 4, client segmentation. 5, communication channels. 6, response time guidelines. 7, communication templates. 8, documenting client interactions. 9, confidentiality and compliance. And last but not least, number 10, feedback mechanisms. I'll also spend some time talking about some concepts that surround performance metrics as well as training programs. So let's get into the define objectives. When you think about defining objectives, what are the key goals to establish effective communication? To me, I think that improving client satisfaction and ensuring timely responsiveness or maintaining professionalism are also important. The clients that have worked with my company in the past know that my goal for their firm is to contact the client before they reach out to us, which honestly improves client satisfaction and maintains professionalism. And most attorneys I consult with usually struggle with ensuring timely responses, or rather proactive client communication. And that's actually what we're going to be spending some time focusing on today. Next, we're going to talk about identifying stakeholders. And to be able to identify stakeholders, you need to be thinking about who within your firm would be responsible for client communication. Is it you as the managing or solo attorney, or is it another attorney or paralegals, or even possibly a client manager? That's something that is really important to consider. Once you know who the stakeholders are, then you can define the roles and responsibilities of these stakeholders. And don't worry, we will focus on you as the attorney and then also a paralegal supporting you in our example today for standard operating procedures. And what that would look like is you as the attorney would be responsible for when the client requires advice or specific updates, and your paralegal would be responsible for communicating with the client at each milestone. In our SOP that we're building today, we will cover these communication checkpoints in a few details. The next topic is understanding CRM features. Now we want to make sure that we understand the capabilities of the CRM so that we can ensure that the SOPs we're building can seamlessly integrate with your systems. What communication specific tools / feature does your CRM offer? Is it email integration? Is it client portals? Is it messaging functionalities? We'll unpack that a little bit later as well. The example that I'm going to show you today is on the Locus platform, and Locus actually covers all 3. If you are a firm that is using the Locus platform for your case management system, stay put because you do not want to miss this. The entire standard operating procedure that we're putting into practice today will be on the Locus platform. So now we're going to get into some of my favorite sections, and that's going to be starting with client segmentation. When it comes to client segmentation, you can characterize clients by importance, services required, or engagement level. You can have some real fun here and layer the segmentations by the importance of the client and services required. Let's say your firm focuses on intellectual property and the client has hired you for a combination of services. Or maybe the client hired your firm to handle just trademark services specifically. One U.S. trademark application under one international class. You can create an SOP to check in with them on each stage of the filing. I know I said that I wanted to go ahead and keep things simple, and that is exactly what we're going to do. In the SOP that we're building today, it will focus on services required. Specifically, we're going to focus on the trademark application aspect of things. We'll be able to really unpack the check-in points based on the milestones, and I'm just going to go ahead and share what those milestones are with you now so that you have a better understanding of what the check-in will look like when we get to that particular step. So when we're going to check in with the client to give them updates, one of the areas that will be like the first touch point will be the comprehensive / knockout search. And when that's completed, to have the client review it. After that, we're going to be focusing on the application and being able to send the application to the client to do the final review and approve it. The next checkpoint would be the application has been filed with the USPTO, and then we'll provide them with the guideline and educate them on a timeline of when the USPTO officially responds or has an examining attorney assigned. That will be another checkpoint. The next checkpoint after that will be focusing on doing just periodic updates with the client, and this particular area happens multiple times. So, to get very specific with you, it would be every 45 days. So every 45 days, we'd reset the clock with the client. We'd do that a couple of times until either the application is assigned to an examining attorney or the application is flagged for an office action. When the application is flagged for an office action, that's going to take us actually to the check-in point number 5. And check-in point number 5 focuses on an office action being issued and communicating that with the client. After that checkpoint, the next checkpoint would be number 6, and that would be the publication confirmation, and we'd notify the client of that. If there is an intent to use application, then at that point, we'd also advise them of the specimens that will be coming up and educating them on the statement of use. And depending on really if there is an intent to use application that we're working with, number 7 would technically be letting them know that the statement of use has been issued and then contacting them to make sure that we get that specimen from them to then upload it into the system. And then the final step would be the trademark registration. And so if this is not an intent to use application, we'd go right into updating the client once the trademark is registered. And that pretty much covers all the checkpoints to notify the client and check in at really good intervals of time. So something that I would like to note when it comes to client segmentation, the reason why those milestone check-ins were important to highlight and mention is because for our SOP that we're going to go through today, it's only going to cover one type of service, and that's going to be the area of one specific trademark application under one international class for one type of mark. So each segment within that particular area for this client would need to have a separate kind of communication. And so that's what we're taking away from this client segmentation. But I want to make sure that I stress that that may not be the case for every single SOP. So if we're working on a more robust SOP, then we're going to be talking about different types of services required and the level of importance for those services required, right? And so if a client maybe came to you for a rushed order, they're going to have a different level of importance and their emails are going to be segmented differently than someone that came in and didn't have a rush. And so those communication types and those conversation methods are going to really be different. And I could honestly talk about client segmentation and the various ways that it can be done all day, and we don't have time for that in this video. Feel free to consult me if that's something you want to spend some more time on. but I just want to make it clear and stress that the way that we're going to go about it in the next area of the video is strictly going to be focused on one specific kind of situation. Any way you take it when you're segmenting clients and we're doing it based on milestone, it's going to be different kinds of communications anyway. And so I just want to make sure that I communicate that, so it's not like, wait, is she saying that this is the only segmentation type? No, not at all. I'm definitely not saying that. The next area that we're talking about now is going to be communication channels. And it's essential for you to establish preferred communication channels for your firm and when each method makes sense, right? So I have found that firms who focus on trademarks typically communicate predominantly by email. Video conferences and calls are secondary forms of communication and usually at the request of the client. So in our standard operating procedure that we're working on today, we're going to incorporate all three with a more emphasis on the email component of the standard operating procedure. The next area, coincidentally, is responsive time guidelines. For this, you want to make sure that you're establishing clear expectations for response times to the client and their inquiries or communications. When you define what constitutes an urgent matter and how quickly it should be addressed, you'll find that the client is more receptive to when you actually reach out to them. And by putting this SOP together, this will actually ensure that you can train the client right when they're a prospect to make sure that they're aware of the turnaround time for responses to communications that they send to you. In addition to that, this will also allow you to train your team, especially during the onboarding phase, to ensure that they're able to keep account of assisting with that follow-up, right? And this is also something that can even tie into your performance metrics. And you can have your system or have a separate database that focuses on each paralegal and each support member of your firm hitting those goals. Game changer. In my personal opinion, I truly feel like responsive time is the perfect place to really start to think about how you're going to map out your standard operating procedure. Obviously, for the reasons that I've mentioned when it comes to performance metrics and training the prospective client, and also to make sure that you discuss these things during consultations, are all reasons why. But I want to explain this to you. So, for example, as a solo attorney, it may take you the average of 3 business days to respond to client emails or return calls, depending on the number of brands you're supporting at a given time. Or maybe you have a team that's supporting you. And if you do have a team, the response time can probably be guaranteed to the client to be 24 hours from when they send the communication over to us, right? And so it's important to make sure that you map that out and have a real understanding of what is going to be the most appropriate way for responding to the client in that time frame, and also make it so that you're not, putting yourself in a box to abide by response times that are not conducive to you being effective and to your team being effective. And this SOP truly is going to help with that. And when we're putting it together, we'll be able to focus on that as well. Don't worry. So the next area that we're going to go into now is actually going to be communication templates. You want to make sure that you're creating standardized templates for common types of client communications. This could be anything from welcome emails, progress updates, or even case-related messages. Whether I'm supporting a firm with paralegal support or CRM implementation, communication templates are something I stress often. It's necessary, right? Especially when you're having the system work for you and just automating things, because it's important to have communication templates, especially when considering hiring additional personnel. When you're the one sending out communications, you tend to send them out in a way that you speak, and I think that when you're finding yourself sending out the same type of communications, it's essential at that point to create a template for it, so that when a new person comes on board, instead of telling them how they should be doing certain things, you can just provide them with that template. And really, by that template living inside of your CRM system, that's something that you can empower the people that are supporting you to ensure that they're utilizing those communication templates often. We want to make sure that we stay clear and steer away from any type of Wild Wild West type of mentality where they're just sending out things that really haven't been approved by you and doesn't follow what the brand typically sends out. And by having these communication templates really nips that in the bud. Documenting client interactions. This is actually one of the most important areas when it comes to crafting your standard operating procedure and becomes highly beneficial where your CRM is concerned. Documenting client interactions where you will need to instruct your staff on the importance of documenting all client interactions within the CRM. Truly, this includes updating case notes, logging phone calls, and even recording emails to maintain a comprehensive client history. I mentioned this in a video recently that it's really in your best interest to ensure that you're doing everything to have all of the communications all in one place and all things that are documented for a particular matter, or in this case for a trademark type of service, is all within the system, because you're able to ensure that those nuances are kept in mind, whether you're crafting or building out that comprehensive report to send back to the client, or maybe you're working on the identification of goods or services description, and you're able to use those case notes and probably even any follow-up calls that have come in to ensure that we are doing everything in our power to give the most up-to-date, or have honestly the most up-to-date information on that trademark application in that identification description of goods and services. This is a great step because you can train your staff during their onboarding process to ensure that they're doing what is necessary here. Confidentiality and compliance. I personally feel that your SOP is not complete if it doesn't include a section on confidentiality and compliance. And it's because there's so much importance to maintaining client confidentiality, especially when it comes to trademark services. What you never want to have happen is being in an instance where your internal staff is discussing with their friends or their family members or anyone that will listen the brands that are currently within your law firm and the different kinds of trademarks and or slogans or whatever the case is that that particular brand is working on. That's a big no-no. So if you are working on putting together your standard operating procedure, you really want to make sure that your SOP covers a section on confidentiality. Last but not least, feedback mechanisms. I have found, literally, when attorneys and law firms implement a feedback mechanism to gather input from clients on the effectiveness of communication, it has really, really, really worked to their advantage. And you're able to then use the feedback from the client to continuously improve and refine the communication process. Every attorney or a firm that I've worked with, especially when we're working on CRM implementation, I make sure that there is a component inside of the workflow that covers obtaining and receiving feedback from the client. Whether it's a detailed email inside of the workflow that covers this, that asks them to, fill out an intake form grading their service, or if you know you're a firm that does an exceptional job all the time, we've even taken it a step further and just given them access to the Google page to be able to leave a Google review once we've delivered service. I mentioned that there were a couple of things that I wanted to note as important highlights, but I won't take too much time stressing them. One of those areas is actually going to be training programs. And, once you've taken the time to flush out the standard operating procedure and you've then also implemented them within your CRM, it's a great time to make sure that you're conducting training programs with the people that are supporting you to make sure that they're on the same page. If your staff has been with you from the beginning and now you're putting these different pieces in place, it's in your best interest to go ahead and educate them so that they're able to fall in line. And that way you're able to stay on top of them if they're ever doing anything that falls out of that realm. If you're a firm that doesn't have any staff members at this time, it's still in your best interest to create videos that train the staff on how to use the CRM and the things that you had in mind when building out the CRM so that they can effectively and efficiently follow your lead without you having to babysit or handhold them. So training programs are essential for sure. The last area that I wanted to spend some time talking about involves performance metrics. And I've mentioned this earlier on, but I just want to highlight it a little bit more here. Some of the components that we've talked about today can really do a great job of being able to have a greater understanding of performance metrics. If, the person that's supporting you in terms of keeping up with client updates, if they're not doing that, if they're not reaching out at the milestones that we've discussed, then that's an area of opportunity in terms of performance metrics. And you could really do a lot with KPIs, right? In addition to that, let's say they watch a training video and now they're supposed to be able to add new people to the system or check in with people or mark off tasks in the system that we develop as a part of the CRM implementation process. This is also something that you can make sure that you're checking off as a performance metric, and it will be beneficial when you're conducting any kind of reviews or you're trying to figure out what support staff to keep or who to let go. These are all areas to consider, because in the end, all of this that we're spending time talking about today really surrounds client communication and effective client communication. And so if it's not being done right, the client's suffering. And that in turn means less dollars for the firm. And that in turn means less referrals for the firm, because a happy client is going to refer everyone to you and sing your praises from the rooftops. Or an unhappy client is instead going to give a bad review or not refer you to anyone. And if it's something that your team has done based on not following protocol, you're really able to flush that out and have a better understanding of that through these SOPs and through these different sections that we spent some time talking about today. All right, guys. So now that we have spent time talking about the 10 concepts that are really important when it comes to building out a standard operating procedure, we are about to get into my favorite 2 areas of this video, and that is reviewing the SOP and then building it out in a CRM. And like I mentioned before, we're going to be using the Locus platform. So if you are a law firm that uses the Locus platform, this 3rd section is going to be for you. But before I get carried away and do the CRM implementation with you, I want to spend some time showing you the SOP. Now that we have identified what those 10 concepts are, I want to show you what those 10 concepts look like inside of your firm, if you're a firm that focuses on trademarks and anything intellectual property. And I will also be showing you the standard operating procedure and highlighting those areas that we discussed earlier on in those 10 concepts so that you can see it. Let's go ahead and jump right into the next area, and that is reviewing the SOP in a more detailed level.